Talent Transformation webcasts are brought to you by the Talent Transformation Guild to help you understand and prepare for the new world of work.
Hello, I'm Eric Shepherd, and I will be the host of today's Talk Forth webcast, along with my friend and co-founder of the Talent Transformation Guild, Martin Belton. Hi, Martin.
Hi, Eric. Thank you. Hi.
So as we struggle with the new normal of the COVID-19 crisis, we're hopefully growing as individuals, but this comes with its challenges. Martin and I wanted to invite some guests along that have some insights into how leaders might be dealing with the crisis to help us understand ourselves and others during this period. Today, we're very lucky to be joined by Ryne Sherman, Chief Science Officer of Hogan Assessments, and John Horton, Lead Consultant at Hogan Assessments. Welcome, guys, and thank you for joining us.
Thanks, Eric, for having me.
Yeah, thanks for having us.
During the crisis, we're trying to provide insights to leaders on how they can manage themselves, manage others, and manage their organizations. Hogan Assessments is world-renowned for its assessments of personalities for recruitment and leadership development. And it's a great privilege to have you on the program today to provide us with your insights. Thank you so much. Turning to Ryne, you are a doctor of philosophy in psychology, and you taught here in Florida and in Texas. You're now Chief Science Officer at Hogan. Could you help us understand your role at Hogan?
Yeah, sure. So my main role at Hogan is to run our data science department. Our data science department has two key areas. One area is called talent analytics. That area helps clients develop custom solutions. So oftentimes clients come to us with a particular job or a particular position they need to have a particular personality profile for. That group does the research with the client to help them identify the personality profile that's most effective in that role, and to help them build the solution for hiring in that role. And then the other side, our product innovation side, develops new products that are sort of off-the-shelf products that anybody can come and get from us, today, tomorrow, whenever. And the group also maintains our norms. We have probably, I would argue, the best global norm of any company in the world. We have data from more than 100 nations, and this group helps create those norms so that we can have both local and global norms for all of our clients' needs.
That's great. That's great. And you guys you do a fantastic job. So congratulations to you and your team. Turning to you, John, we've known each other for a while, and I know somewhat about what you do, but our listeners and viewers today don't. So I just wonder whether you could describe your role.
Sure thing. Yeah, I'm lead consultant for Consultants Network. And what that is a network of independent consultants that use the Hogan Assessments, as well as some other assessments too, but primarily Hogan. So what I do, aside from general management, helping them with marketing, letting them know our logistics and for how to manage their independent accounts, most of what I do ends up being giving them consulting around the Hogan Assessment data. So taking the data that they see in their clients' profiles and translating that into different interventions based on the situation, constructing micro routines off of a combination of scales that we see or a combination of data that we see from the situation. So a lot of most of it ends up being consulting. It's a consulting to consultants.
Yeah. And your consultants do a great job. I mean,
yeah,
you just look at a bunch of numbers, that you need to have that subtle understanding of what that really means in the real world. Yeah. And I know that you regularly run conference calls for your consultants to kind of answer questions for them. And they're really on the front lines of helping leaders manage their own emotions, helping them manage the emotions of others, and managing their organizations. What kinds of questions and themes and suggestions are you hearing at this time in the midst of this crisis? And what kind of advice are you offering these days?
Yeah, I mean, some questions that we get are, how do we coach people in these kinds of crises? And it's different for every situation that you see. So you see someone who's lower in our adjustment scale, which is related to neuroticism. You see someone lower in that adjustment scale, you might have a different approach than seeing someone who's higher in the adjustment scale, so less reactive to stress. really what the general advice is really dig deep into the scales and see what the pain points are, like specific to your clients. So if someone is very orderly and maybe higher on our prudence scale, for instance, there's going to be a much different approach to that than if they were higher in our inquisitive scale.
So, what kind of things might you suggest there, John? If you pick a couple of those examples.
Sure. Yeah, and keep in mind, I mean, we're factoring across about 143 variables. So, what I am about to say is something that's fairly general, but if you have someone who is lower in adjustment, you might want to be focusing on dealing with their anxiety or validating anxiety or something like that, and then going into, well, what are some ways that we can approach what you're anxious about, maybe shine some light on it, and that way it becomes less scary or less of a monster. I don't want to, for instance, have to terminate a lot of people and say, okay, well, it's a simple termination now where they can eventually get a job, get a job that's more appropriate later, or something like that. Mm-hmm. Versus, say, someone who's higher in prudence, for instance, the idea of being in a new situation where there are a lot of unknowns. You want to focus on, okay, well, what things can you control? What things can you keep within this little box, or a box that you sort of put in your head? And then where are some areas that you can't categorize something? You can't put that in a box. You can't put like some issue in a box. So you need to be more flexible in that regard. And maybe that's where you shine the lights on.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, understood. And then how are your consultants dealing with this change? Because they must be dealing with a lot of different situations, so they're going to have to be very flexible. And I suspect their business is a little uncertain at the moment. How are they dealing with it?
Yeah, exactly. I mean, they're. I think at this point, the consultants are practicing what they need to practice what they preach, and for the most part, they are, which is. Mm-hmm. Okay, look, this is a crisis. This is how I would advise my clients to act based on their profiles in the time of a crisis. So that means that I need to dig into my profile and see how maybe I need to act. So the lower prudent folks, for instance, are getting more orderly, and the higher prudent folks are being more flexible. So for instance, right. you have someone who's done executive coaching for 10, 15, 20 years. Now they might be transitioning into career coaching because some of their clients are let go or something like that, and they need to be at service to their clients. It all comes down to where is the service needed, and that's really what I'm pointing them to. Is think about your client list, think about who's in your network and how you can add value to them. And if that's career coaching, if that's just giving them someone to talk to that's not someone work related or not their family, then you can do that. We're certainly telling them too, it seems to be a general trend that they're staying away from talking about dollars and cents at this time. And it's just, let me add value. We'll talk about money later. So those are.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. And it also points to the value of the consultants being engaged with the results of the assessment and the context of the individual to kind of match those together.
That's exactly it. Yep.
Ryne, if I could turn to you, you have access to lots of data about personality inventories, derailers, values, motives, and preferences. What have you been learning from your most recent data sets?
Yeah, so we've been sort of exploring lots of different options there. I mean, we get questions all the time about, is this an important thing, or does this matter? How do these things change over time? One of the big things we've been looking at right now are some of the most common profiles in our assessments. So people take our assessments. We have 3 core assessments, as you mentioned, and people take those assessments and one of the things that came up to us was, do people ever get sort of similar scores in terms of their profile? Are they similar across all 3 of those assessments? And the answer is there's more than 1 trillion possible profiles that could exist. But some profiles do show up more often than others. And one of the things that we've been looking at is these most common profiles that show up in our assessments. And there's a really neat set of features there. And we've done some blogs and things like that on. But that's one of the most recent things we've been working on.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. Managing a crisis becomes more of a challenge when you have to face your own mortality or the mortality of your friends or family or colleagues. And of course, that is becoming more real as we've gotten into this. And I assume that these kind of things could trigger derailers. And so people might adjust the way they're performing. Subconsciously, they will kind of change and potentially use these derailers that are not going to be successful, but they use them anyway. So kind of a two-part question here. One is which leadership styles and personality styles will help or hinder us in managing these uncertainties? And if we don't naturally have these styles, how could we compensate so that we can manage what we have to manage, even though we're being derailed by facing the mortality or even just simple isolation and the lack of connectivity with others?
Yeah, well, that's one of the big questions right now, and of course, that's one that we're getting asked a lot is about, who's most effective for leading in a crisis, or what are the personality characteristics that are essential for leading through a crisis. And we've actually done a fair amount of research on this. We had several people from my staff who actually dug into the literature to say what do we know about crisis leadership? What are the most effective behavioral strategies that we see, and how are those related to our assessments? We have an archive of performance data where we can actually see how do our assessments relate to performance on these essential characteristics. And a few things really stand out. One thing that's really clear to us is that the effective crisis leaders show compassion for the people that are most affected by the crisis, right? So again, if it's a situation where your own mortality or your loved one's mortality is at risk, right, it's really important that the leader of your group, your organization, whether it's a nation, or whether it's a team, or whether it's a company, that they show that compassion. They show that they actually care about the people who they're leading. So that's one of the things. And in our assessments, that's predicted by interpersonal sensitivity. That's predicted by altruism. We also, one of the second things we see is that they have to remain calm. And this is sort of an obvious one. Everybody sort of gets this one, that you look to your leader to see how to react. And if you see a leader who's very panicked, then you start to panic yourselves, and this can devolve your organization into chaos. So they want someone who's calm and steady. That's predicted by adjustment in our assessments. And then if I could add a third, or maybe even a fourth, the third is that we want someone who takes an accurate look at the problem, who can accurately evaluate the scope of the crisis. Is this really a crisis? How costly is the crisis going to be? It's easy to want to dismiss problems, right? So if I'm running an organization, if I'm running a company, and I hear about a problem, it's easy to want to ignore it, push it aside, because that's distracting me from whatever, from looking good, from looking great. I don't want to do this, right? So it's easy to push those away. So it's really important to have leaders who recognize the problem, recognize the scope of the problem, and are really honest and sincere about that. And so that's actually predicted by a couple of scales on our derailer side that you mentioned. And then I guess those are the big three. Well, I guess the last one, the fourth one I mentioned is that they also need to take decisive action. When we have a leader, or when you're in a crisis situation, people are looking to the leader to make a decision. So oftentimes we have people in leadership roles that hesitate to make those decisions when it's really critical. They want to wait for more information, or they're just afraid of making a mistake, and so they won't take that step. And so one of the big predictors of leading during a crisis that we find is being able to make that decision to take charge and take control of things.
Mm-hmm. That makes sense. John, do you have anything to add on that?
I do, yeah. I mean, getting more specifically, I'm sort of piggybacking off of what Ryne said, the idea around stalling on decisions, a lot of times that can be helped, specific again to every situation, but a lot of times that can just be helped with putting a time limit on the decisions that you need to make, knowing that like I need to make this decision by Friday. It's Wednesday. I'm going to try to make my decision by noon on Thursday, for instance. And, as a coach, a lot of times I'm saying start with that and then add on to it based on the situation. A lot of times with like emotional volatility, when you see someone who's not being calm, part of that behavioral pattern ends up being the need to want to withdraw. like withdrawal from the negative emotion. So something as simple as stepping out of a meeting or taking a call and knowing that, like, all right, I'm going to after this, I'm going to come back in and I'm going to be more calm. Sort of have that little negotiation with yourself can sometimes be helpful if you're more prone to be more emotionally volatile.
That makes a lot of sense. And these days, all information is going to be imperfect because it's changing. We
Right.
see the data change from day to day as far as the pandemic is concerned.
Right.
Martin, I'm not really letting you get a word in edgeways here. I'm sure you've got some questions. Let me just turn to you for a moment.
Sure. There was a question, really. I'd just like to know what actually, for the uninitiated, what constitutes a derailer, and then actually, we know that COVID-19 is one heck of a crisis, but what else has ever been a national crisis? So we're looking back to the last time would be the sort of bank crash, or are our derailers more usually local to an organisation? Are they more sort of organisation specific?
John, do you want me to jump in, or do you want to?
I can think, Eric, I think you had said the 2008 crisis was a crisis for the CFOs, and this is the crisis for the CHROs.
Yes.
So when I think about what Ryne had said about the different leadership styles, and maybe now focusing there needing to be what needs to be the first kind of leadership style to lead with is people leadership or relationship leadership. That may come second to the results. I think that I want to make sure I'm answering your question right. I think that's what's unique about this crisis now is that it's not so much a financial thing. In fact, people who mention the economy in the face of other people, passing away or being very sick, like there's a general consensus that's, from what I'm getting, there's a general consensus that's sort of the wrong way to be thinking about it. We need to be thinking about people first. Mm-hmm. So I'd say that those leadership styles, the people and the relationship leadership is coming front and center are going to be unique to this crisis. As far as unique to the organization, your question was initially what's a derailer? I like to define sorry about that. I like to define a derailer as unsustainable behavioral patterns. Basically interpersonally unsustainable behavioral patterns. So things that you can't do around other people for long.
Sorry, just on behavioral styles, the comparison I often draw to help people understand that for organizational culture and behavioral styles at an organization level is around when you think of the Marines, or you think of a bank, or you think of a manufacturing plant. Clearly, there's different behaviors in those, and they're all functional organizations. They all achieve their mission, but they're different. And so, but if we were to transplant the culture of one of those organizations and put it in another, it would be considered unsustainable, to your point.
Right.
Ryne, I saw you were going to jump in there.
Well, yeah, and thinking about the question of what is a derailer, one way of thinking about them is particularly, I think, is relevant to how John's describing them, is sort of like what small children do, but it's an adult behavior that's equivalent to what small children do, right? So sometimes I have two small children. Sometimes they cry, or they scream about something, or they demand that you do something. And sometimes it works because for whatever reason, you just don't have the patience to deal with explaining to them. So you just get them their juice, or you get them whatever they need in the moment. But this isn't a sustainable behavior, right? And you try to teach them as a parent, you try to teach them, look, that's not the right way to ask for things. That's not the right way to behave. And it's the same kind of thing for derailers for adults. These are these sorts of behaviors that sometimes they get away with it, and sometimes it lets them get along and it gets through stuff. But long term, it wears people out, and they won't put up with it. And ultimately, it leads to failure as a leader. It can lead to career failure as well, right? So that's why we think of them as derailers, because they're ways that really get your career off of track. But I also wanted to add one other point there. In terms of a crisis, like one of the things that I think people don't quite get, what's a comparable crisis to this? When we think about the financial crash of 2008, 2009. But I think one of the things that people fail to recognize is that every organization faces a crisis at some point. I think crisis is more common, maybe not at the scale, but because this is really at the national level. But every organization faces a crisis at some point, and ultimately, this is why leadership is so important. The legacy of the leader is often determined by how well they deal with that crisis that they're eventually faced with.
Mm-hmm. That's great. Thank you. Thank you both. So we know that everything is happening here in real time. So I'm just going to kind of derail the conversation here. I'm going to change track. We know everything's happening in real time, and there isn't a chance for leaders to go on a 6-week training course because they're busy managing the crisis. So maybe what skills would you recommend leaders start developing for now or as we come out of this crisis? And how would you recommend they develop these skills in the midst of this pandemic?
Ooh, it's a big one. I'd say, my first response is mindfulness, being able to look at something and, sort of see it without the emotion that may come with it. Like I need to understand the situation, all its objective parts and whatnot, and just observe it. Maybe that's not the exact definition of mindfulness, but being able to observe something objectively, I think is huge. But I say that, and then I think of, well, what about the emotional side of all of this? So I think it's packed in. What comes along with that is mindfulness with like emotional intelligence, understanding what people are going through, understanding like how to deal with it, and also understanding what you as yourself as the leader is going through too, because it's, I think in many cases, these leaders are expected to perform just as they normally have been, with a lot more social pressure, with, especially being quarantined. In some cases, it's without the positive feedback that you typically get if you're around a lot of people. So you're almost working at half capacity, trying to do more work. So I think I think emotional intelligence is something that's really important, outward and inward, along with mindfulness. Those are my two initial skills that I would think. Yeah.
That makes sense. And the first concept of this idea of pausing for thought, there's a lot going on, so just pause and think. And so if you were to develop a checklist for leaders so that because they can't go to a training course, they just want to look down at their notes and when they're trying to manage a difficult situation, what would you put on that checklist that might just be memory joggers for them to help them get through a difficult conference call or difficult experience?
Yeah. Pause when you feel negative emotion. Make sure you're pausing. Just give yourself a minute or two. If it's a conference call, like a good thing, I think we've called it sports casting. We sort of say, I need a minute to process that. Just say what you're doing versus just sitting there and not speaking.
Right.
Asking for that time and then just taking it, I think is important. As far as emotional intelligence, that's the initial point was there for mindfulness, making sure that you're pausing in between your emotions. For emotional intelligence, I would say that's a tough one because it's so multifaceted. The idea in general for emotional intelligence is awareness around, like, consciousness around what emotions are at play here between the many parties. So you're on a conference call with 5 people. You can think about, what are these people going through as I'm saying this? What am I going through as well? What does that indicate relative to us as a team getting closer to our goals, them as individuals getting closer or further away from our goals, and then myself getting closer or further away to our goal? That's the basic mechanics of emotions, is they're like a barometer to tell you how close or far away you're getting from your goals. So I'd say keep that in mind. Is this a negative or a positive emotion? Then once you've categorized it, you can sort of say, like, all right, how is this threatening or helping us get done what we need to?
Very good. Ryan, Martin?
Yeah. I mean, if I could add from a sort of a checklist standpoint, I mean, I go to these four things that we keep seeing show up in the literature. One is to show compassion, show that you care. Right. This is a checklist for a leader who is leading through a crisis. How can I be effective at leading through crisis? One, show compassion for my people, for my constituents. Number two, be steady, be calm. Everybody's feeling the stress on the inside, including you as the leader, but it's really important that you show that you're steady and calm on the outside. Number three, objectively evaluate the information. Get the information in front of you and evaluate that, and be as realistic as you can about the situation. And then number four, make a decision when it's time to make a decision. Right, take action at the critical moment.
Yeah, great. Thank you.
Yeah, Ryne, could I just ask you this? I think you mentioned earlier that you have something like 143 different variables that you have to define the define the structure of these things. Has the crisis now actually changed the way that you look at these things, that you're measuring these things? So, are you bringing any other new variables in, or are you changing the rubric slightly and looking at these things slightly differently at all?
Yeah, so one of the beautiful things about our setup, our assessment suite, is that we've got these 140 plus variables. These really cover the entire landscape of what makes us different as individuals, in the ways that we have these different interpersonal behaviors, what makes us different from each other. We can really cover the entire landscape with these things, but sometimes different combinations of them mean different things, right? So one of the questions we've had recently concerns mental toughness, and this is related to this crisis. How do people stay mentally tough during a crisis situation? Well, it turns out a particular combination of these variables corresponds really closely with that concept of mental toughness, right? And so it's not so much about on the measurement side that's different, but it's about getting the right combinations of variables together so that you can get the outcome you're most interested in.
Great, thank you.
So we're just talking about how leaders were kind of super busy in managing their operations, but some people are just not busy. They can't work from home, so they're sitting at home watching Netflix. What are the kind of learning experience that you would recommend that they seek out to be ready for getting through the rest of this crisis and then getting back to the new world of work?
Yeah, I'd say just to lead off on it, I'd say set a goal and aim at it and try for it, which is really to say keep up a discipline, develop a discipline, or keep up with one. You're doing that every day in little micro routines every day at work. Setting an email, opening up an email. That's the start of a goal. Sending the email is the end of the goal, right? Mm-hmm. So if you're not doing anything, our brain is in a lot of ways like our muscles. Like, it's not going to atrophy or anything like that, but like, we need to keep these parts that are helping us achieve our overall goals. We need to keep those things active, just as we would go on runs so that we don't get weak in our legs, or do push-ups so we don't get weak in our arms. So I mean, my initial thing is, if you're bored, go exploring. That's usually the sort of response to boredom is to go explore. Or if you need some sort of task, if you're a task-oriented person, set a goal, aim at that goal, and then try to accomplish it, and just repeat. Repeat.
Mm-hmm. Makes sense. Yeah. Ryan?
Yeah, I mean, the other thing I would add is, in terms of more technical skills, I think that what we're seeing with this pandemic is we're sort of getting a preview of where the future of work is headed. We've been told the future of work is headed much more remote for a long time. And I think what we're going to find out is that a lot of organizations are going to find out, you know what, that remote thing was all right. We did okay with that remote thing. We were pretty effective at it, but we need to get better at it. So from an individual standpoint, it's getting better at the remote work. So whether that's setting your routine and getting stuff the sort of the way that you're making your workspace work for you, but it's also going to be things like adapting to technology, right? How figuring out how Zoom works, or how these kinds of meeting spaces can work most effectively. Those are the kinds of things that I think are going to be the sort of critical technical skills people are going to have to pick up, so that because as more and more work transitions to remote, you're going to want to have that background and those experiences.
Yeah, that's great advice. Great advice. Martin, final question or two from you?
I really have been fascinated by what you've had to say, Ryne and John. I think it's been incredibly revealing. Just really going back and focusing on the new world of work. Of course, there are many different aspects that crop up that are encompassed by the new world of work, and I'm thinking about whether we should, buy in support, or whether we should give it to robots or whatever. Are there any other aspects of the world of work such as that, or to do with, let's say, generational issues? Have you noticed any sort of major generational issues that have been cropping up, which might be interesting for other people in the future?
Yeah, I mean, not so much on the generational side. We see mostly young people today look a lot like young people yesterday. But I do think work is changing in the sense that almost everybody wants more flexibility. Everybody wants, and I think that's what one of the big outcomes we're going to see out of this remote work that's resulting from this pandemic, is that people are going to realize that the flexibility, how much they really value that flexibility. And by that, what I mean is, starting your day half an hour later. I mean, being able to take a 15-minute break to fold the laundry. I mean, those kinds of things that sort of help you get through life, that you don't have to do outside of the 8 to 5 hours. Now, suddenly, instead of that 15-minute break where you went down and talked to a colleague and ate a candy bar, now you're doing it, doing something productive in your home. You're making a phone call to a maintenance person who's going to come over and fix something, right? You're getting those kinds of things done in a way that's more efficient and much more flexible. You're working past 5 more. I think you're going to see that. But again, I think people are very comfortable doing those kinds of things if they have that flexibility.
Makes sense.
Thanks. Yeah.
All right. Well, thank you, guys. As Martin said,
Yeah,
it was very insightful. Not the word he used, but I found it very helpful and very insightful. A lot of people are going to get a lot of value from this. So thank you. And unfortunately, that's all the time we have for this webcast. So thank you again, Ryne, John, and Martin for joining us today.
Absolutely.
Thank you guys very much. We really appreciate it.
Yeah, thank you.
And I would just like to finish off, as is our tradition here, just to take a moment to thank our scientists and healthcare workers that are using their talents to inform us in the short term, to cure us in the medium term, and keep us safe in the long term.
Yeah.
Thank you, and thank you all.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you for listening. If you have enjoyed this webcast, please subscribe and like the show. And to learn and understand more about the new world of work, please visit www.talenttransformation.com. Subscribe and become a member. Thank you.